I will kick off now. So first of all, I'll introduce Clover, and I'll introduce myself in a moment. So Clover HR, we're your trusted people advisors. We've been helping people for a number of years now. We have 150 years of experience between us, and we all have different types of specialisms. So some of those listed below, so recruitment, training, coaching, wellbeing, reward, lots and lots of other specialisms to do with HR. And there's a picture of the team there. I'm there on the left. Just to say, question and answers, if you have any questions, please do feel free to drop me an email or send an email across to the Clover information line, which is down at the bottom of your screen there. I'll come back to you in response to any of your questions, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them for you. If I could ask if you could mute yourselves, I don't think it makes any difference. I don't think I'd be able to hear you the way I'm set up, but just in case. And then we'll get on to today's content. So this is what we'll be looking at today. Firstly, why tackle long-term sickness at all? Secondly, procedures. So how we go about it. Thirdly, managers' behaviours, because managers are integral to getting someone back into work and supporting them. And then finally, just some legal points around reasonable adjustments. So to begin with, just to ease us in, I've got some stats for you. So 141.4 million working days lost due to sickness or injury. That's 4.4 days per employee. So these figures are from the Office of National Statistics, and they show data for 2018. So those are the latest full figures that we have available. It's very likely that these are going to be significantly influenced in the last couple of years by COVID. Obviously, I think we're going to see quite an increase in absence because of that. So in a way, it's quite good that we've got these stats from prior, just so we can get an idea of the situation on a normal year, shall we say. And we can see from that it is quite significant. Sickness rates have been decreasing in all age groups, so by more than a third since 1995. Highest rates of absence are in women, older workers, and people with long-term health conditions, part-time workers, and people working in organisations with over 500 employees. So that's you can look at some inferences from those and reasons perhaps behind absence there. 4.4% of absence rates are for people with long-term health conditions, and that's compared to 1.1% of people without the long-term health conditions. So obviously long-term health conditions are going to have significant impact on a business's absence levels. So just to have a quick look as well about reasons for absence. So the top most common reasons for absence are 27.2% are minor. So things like your cough, your cold, short-term. And then we get on to the next kind of large percentage groups are musculoskeletal at 19.7% and mental health at 12.4%. So it is true that mental health is the new bad bag. Yeah, it is coming up to the same kind of level of percentage there as a reason. And it's because these are long-term conditions, obviously, so it has a significant impact because the people are essentially off for longer. Evidence is clear that tackling long-term sickness can reduce the days lost due to sickness absence and increase productivity. There's a direct link on costs of business, which is why it's worth spending the time to looking at how to improve it. And that's the subject and why today's webinar was chosen as something that is very relevant for businesses today. So why tackle long-term sickness? So I've just kind of touched upon this, but it's important from the employee's perspective to get them back into the working environment, but it is also a benefit to the employer. So we'll start with, for the employee, return to work represents a sense of normality. And I think we'll probably aware of how pleasant a sense of normality would be at the moment. And I think, the current situation does make this topic really relatable for everybody, because you're experiencing a lot of what people on long-term sickness who are not in a business are experiencing. So getting them back in, it increases self-respect, self-esteem, mental well-being, social inclusion. So again, current experiences are that we see how difficult it is not having that social ability to talk to people face to face. Also, financial stability and independence. And a well-planned and well-executed return to work can have substantial positive benefits to an employee's well-being and to their rehabilitation. And it could also prevent potential relapse. So it's not just about getting them back, but how we develop them and sustain that return. And then finally, the commercial benefits, and this is an obvious one. It kind of goes without saying that this is important for a business. So it's not just positives for the employee, but also positives for the employer. There's implications of long-term sick, work's not being done, having to incur additional costs, loss of skill, impact on customers. So not having this, obviously, is a great benefit to a business. So I'm going to spend a bit of time looking at procedure here, because that's kind of what people want to know about and what they can do, what they should be doing. So the first one is keeping in contact. And with this, I would definitely recommend start as you mean to go on. Make sure you're regularly speaking with the person right from the outset. A lot of managers worry that they shouldn't be speaking to someone who's sick, but I would say that this is counterintuitive. You need to call them, even if you don't need an update, just to say hi, just to see how they're doing, tell them what's been happening in the workplace so that they have that connection still. The idea as well is that this will keep them engaged with the work. They'll feel like they're missing something. They won't have that loss and lack of connection that sometimes can happen with a prolonged period of absence. Also, it might be necessary to have an update with them in terms of what is happening, what the prognosis is. Have they been to see the doctor? How do they feel about returning? Consider inviting them in if they're able to, and obviously once we're able to be within a business setting. Let them speak to colleagues, see the place. People can become anxious with change, and so having that connection still maintains their sense of what is normal. So coming into the business is still normal. I think we're likely to see this situation when people go back to work following periods of working from home after coronavirus. And not the subject for today, but I think it interlinks with this very, very nicely, to be honest, as well. It's that sense of normality and keeping people engaged with being in work. Second point, get occupational health advice. So you're not expected to understand the medical situation. You can get advice from your occupational health provider to explain clearly what the issue is with the person's absence. And this isn't to tell you all the medical information that you don't necessarily need to know. This is just to explain the effect of the condition upon that person and the situation for their ability to return to work. And it's worth remembering that, keep in sight that that's the ultimate goal. That's why you're getting this information. It is to help them be able to return. And that's where, if you're not satisfied with your occupational health, you can request that they give you more advice on how actually practically to help that person's return. And kind of linked to this is fit notes. So review the fit notes. Again, you're not expected to have a full medical understanding of all the permutations of what's happened to them that's resulted in the absence. You can use this information given on the sick note to review when the person's likely to be able to return. So, for example, how long is the doctor's note for? That tends to give you a sense of the seriousness of the absence as well. Does the note detail any adjustments, like duties, that would mean that the person could come back sooner? And those will link in what they can do, will perhaps give you some more understanding of the reasons behind the absence. We'll discuss adjustments and phase returns later on in the webinar. But I think it's important that it's remembered, don't be afraid to ask the person to go back to the doctor if you do need more advice, particularly if you don't have an occupational health advisor. So the doctor might be able to put more written information onto a sick note or a fit note. Obviously, many of us have seen notes that have come from doctors, and a lot of the time there's very little information on there. It's tick boxes to say what they can and can't do, whether it be that this person can do light duties, but it doesn't give any detail on what that necessarily means that they could do. So it's often worth asking the person to go back and speak to the doctor, explain what their job role is, and see if they can get a little bit more detail from the doctor on what they can and can't do. Next, we have a plan. So create a plan and communicate it to that person. Make sure that it's tailored to them and they understand that you've spent the time, you've thought about their particular circumstance. For example, look at when you'll next call them to review their sick note. Will you wait until the end of the period of the sick note? Will you review with them just before? And how this plan works might change. You may well have to adapt it over time. But setting something out early demonstrates that you are planning for them and you're helping them get back into work, and that's the ultimate aim. Hopefully this helps keep them engaged, and it can often encourage them to make the effort in communicating from their side as well. So they'll come to you with updates because they feel like you want to know the information, and it's of interest to you to be trying to get them back, not just a kind of tick box exercise of I've phoned them because I had to phone them today, but actually understanding what you can do to help. Next, consider adjustments. So again, I'm going to discuss that in a bit more detail later on in the webinar, but it is something that needs to be considered. And maintaining contact. So not just keeping in contact initially, but maintaining that through the absence, particularly if it is a longer term absence. But also, once they are back, maintaining it still during their return, whether it be a phased return or later into their return, to make sure that it's sustained. A structured plan and constant review will nip any small issues in the bud and help with understanding of how that person's feeling about their return. Bear in mind that this might be a big change for them if they've been off for a substantial period of time, and the impact of this shouldn't be ignored. Better contact and review and communication with the person, whether it be on a phased return, whether it be to discuss adjustments, or they're just back to their normal role and it's checking in. The more contact that is made, the more likely they are to sustain that return. So we move on to the role of line managers. And line managers are important for the return to work process for a number of reasons. Firstly, they are the first point of contact, usually in a business, with that individual. They're responsible for the day-to-day management, so they're responsible for the tasks that are set for that person. The manager's behaviour can influence the employee's exposure to psychological stress, psychosocial stress as well, work demands, control. So really we're looking here at what is allocated to that person and what breaks they can have, what you can do to help manage their return. And the manager's behaviour really is integral. It can cause the employee stress or it can prevent additional stress. And it's looking at the techniques to make sure that we are preventing additional stress and not adding to their stress. So these tie into the procedure points on communication as well, which we've discussed. So we'll now look at more practical pointers for managers in a bit more detail. So Managers' behaviours during absence, and these are taken from the CIPD competency framework for managers to support return to work. So it's practical guideline points of how to behave as a manager. So I'll just talk through these points. So firstly, we have regularly communicate with the individual via telephone or email, as we've discussed. Regularly communicate work issues with the individual to keep them in the loop. Again, as we've discussed, it's talking about what's happening at work so that they don't feel that they're out of the picture, they don't know what's been happening, any changes, etc. Focus the conversation on the individual's well-being and make it clear that this isn't the purpose of these conversations isn't to rush them back. It isn't to just around getting them back to work, but it is also from a personal point of view to understand what is happening with this individual, somebody that you've been working with, and it's understanding them as an individual. Encouraging work colleagues and other members of the organisation to keep in touch as well. So, just seeing if a social call would be appropriate from other people, just so that, again, they feel that they've still got that connection with the people that they would previously have been speaking to day to day. Also make it clear that the company will support the individual during their absence, and as part of that, being upfront about financial implications is important. Obviously, this is going to be at the forefront of some people's minds with their absence, the fact that they physically perhaps cannot be in work. And reassure the individual that their job will be there on their return. Or if there's doubt about that, have that conversation as soon as you're aware of that might be a possibility. And all of this will prevent, hopefully, the individual from pushing themselves too much to return to work, because often if somebody returns before they're able to, they then go off again. And it is often harder to get somebody back into the working environment when they've kind of been in briefly, gone back off again, because they'll be worried that will happen again. So moving on really to practical points about the initial return to work. So give the individual light duties, different jobs during the initial return. Consider this. Incorporate a phased return for the individual. So these are all points really to think about, to have in the forefront of your mind. Remain objective when discussing the return to work options for the individual. Be open to their suggestions. Explain the process and procedures to the individual before they return, so nothing comes as a surprise to them, and to make sure that they are doing everything that we need them to. Explain any changes to the individual's roles, their responsibilities, work practices, whether these are temporary or whether changes have happened in their absence. And an obvious point perhaps, but worth saying, is meet the individual on their first day back. You welcoming them back to the business, you may not have seen them for some time, and they will be waiting to speak to you. So make that a priority. And make their first week back as low stress as possible. The first week gives them an impression of how things are going to continue, and you want to be welcoming them. You want them to have missed work and realise, the benefits that they do have from being within the business. And then we move on to more general behaviours. So ask the individual for permission to keep the team informed of what's going on with them, and encourage colleagues to help them with the rehabilitation process, and promote a positive team spirit. Everybody working together and understanding the issues that somebody might face will help engage them with that person, and not feel reluctant towards helping them, or resentful that they're possibly not perceived as pulling their weight maybe on their return. If someone understands why that is happening, then they'll be a lot more accommodating of it. Obviously, this all depends on the individual giving permission for that information to be shared. You don't want to be providing information to other people that is personal, that they may not necessarily want to be shared. Be proactive in arranging meetings to discuss the health condition and the possible impact on their work. So again, keeping up the communication and communicating openly. be approachable and listening and responding quickly to any concerns that they raise. I also think it's important to show awareness of the relevant legal responsibilities, so the need to make reasonable adjustments by law. If they understand that you know what you should be doing, they'll feel a lot more confident and trusting in you to be doing those things right. And make sure you're following your own procedures correctly as well. The worst thing is for them to feel that they've been treated somehow differently. And if you've got a written detail of how something should happen and it doesn't happen that way, they will get the sense of that. So these are just to highlight things not to do. And again, a lot of this is common sense, but it's worth reiterating. So don't lose patience with the individual when things become difficult, because they may well become difficult. Don't display any aggressive actions. Don't question the individual's every move. Don't go against the individual's request for adjustments without a clear conversation and an explanation as to why. And don't make the individual feel like a nuisance for adding extra work to their schedule. These are all fairly obvious things not to do, and generally things not to do overall as a manager, when speaking to people. But it's just worth having them at the front of your mind. So we'll come on to reasonable adjustments. So here we say, if an employee has a disability, by law, the employer must consider making reasonable adjustments if needed to help them return to work. This shouldn't just be looked at as a legal requirement though, but looked at from a positive point of view. This is doing something that will help somebody return to work and hopefully prevent any further problems. So it's a way of relieving some of those commercial issues of having someone not at work. Before making any adjustments, you should always get the advice from the employee's doctor or for occupational health. They will be able to support you in understanding. As we've said previously, you're not expected to have all the medical knowledge, so you will need guidance on what is appropriate to do for somebody. So for example, some reasonable adjustments. Making changes to working hours. So what time should that person be starting? Is it easier for them to come into work later? Will it take them longer to get into work? Things like this. Review their duties and tasks. Could they be done differently or with assistance? And making changes to workstations or working equipment to make it accessible for the individual. So a phased return is an option. So a phased return could include reduced hours. It could include light duties or different duties. Some ideas on reduction of hours are that it might be that a person needs this phased so that they can get used to being back at work again. So it might not necessarily be a physical issue, but it might be that mentally they need some more time to adjust to being back in the workplace, and that may help them. The same with light duties. It's building people up to slowly get them back to the position that they were in, where that's appropriate and possible. And different duties. Sometimes it is worth looking at, actually, they can no longer do what they were doing. What else could they do? And could they be redeployed into something? So in summary, not dealing with long-term sickness is costly. You should have procedures in place to follow. Your managers need to be trained to deal correctly with absence and to understand their responsibilities and obligations around the return to work. And if a return is unsuccessful, you need to consider the next steps with HR guidance. If you need any help with any of these areas, Clover HR are available to help. We can review your processes before you have an issue, or we can offer guidance on any ongoing long-term sickness issues that you have. So we've got plenty of experience of dealing with quite complex and tricky cases of people returning to work and reasonable adjustments, what's appropriate, what isn't. So this is the type of area that we can help in and provide our expertise. So as I said previously, if you've got any questions, please do feel free to drop me an email. My details will be on the final slide. Also, there's an email address there for information at Clover HR. So it's info@cloverhr.co.uk. And do feel free, if you've got any questions that come out of this, do feel free to drop me an email and I'll come back to you. And then finally, it's just for me to say thank you for attending. I hope you found it useful. It's an interesting and quite complex subject, so we've kind of skimmed the surface here. And as I've mentioned previously, I think a lot of this will be similar to people returning from working at home during COVID. A lot of the practical ideas are the same, and a lot of the feelings that people will have around not having been in the business for a while will be the same as well. So it's worth considering it in that context as well. So thank you everybody for attending, and I hope you'll be able to come along to some more Clover HR webinars that we'll be putting on. If you have a look on our website, they've got details of all the others. So again, thank you.